In this episode, I hand the mic over to Emily Manley, my colleague and career coach from Relaunch Me. Emily interviews Sophie Hose, who is the founder of Melbourne-based fashion label Tahlo, and talks to her about her own career journey, starting in corporate marketing and banking and transitioning to starting up her own fashion label 3 years ago, despite any formal training in fashion. This is a must listen for anyone who is aspiring to be a fashion designer or to start their own fashion label in the future. I hope you enjoy Soph's story. Welcome to the Relaunch Your Career podcast. I am your host, Leah Lambert, career and interview coach and founder of Relaunch Me, where we help you find the work that you were meant to do.
Welcome everybody to the Relaunch Your Career podcast. I'm really excited today because I've been wanting to get this guest on for quite a while now. I've got the very lovely Sophie Hose, who started her career as a bit of a marketing guru and then transitioned into some other areas of corporate life before finding her way into fashion. So welcome, Soph.
Hi, Em. How are you going?
I'm good. It's good to have you here. Looking forward to sharing your story with our listeners. I'm sure many people will find it inspirational. What I wanted to do first, Soph, is just ask if you could explain sort of some of your earlier career and what led you to go into marketing.
Sure. So I did a marketing degree straight out of school. I was tossing up between doing journalism and decided to do marketing because it was kind of a safer choice. So I did a Bachelor of Business, majoring in marketing. And from there ended up in some bigger brands and started out like a lot of people in marketing as kind of like campaign coordinator, marketing assistant type thing. And through that time was working on marketing communications campaigns and gradually decided that I wanted to be less executing campaigns that were maybe not what I thought was the best strategy and moving closer into marketing strategy and then into kind of business strategy. So gradually getting closer to where decisions were made and away from kind of whether it should be teal or blue in the font or, I remember having this moment where I was working for kind of a really big brand and going between the CMO and the agency and me being kind of the campaign coordinator type person and spending like the whole day talking about whether it should be was or were and just like having one of those moments of thinking like this campaign is not even a good campaign and we're spending all of this time figuring this out. I need to get closer to where the campaigns we work on are getting decided because really it's such a dud campaign. This is the least of our worries. So, So I think there's probably a lot of people who are in marketing comms who either love the thrill of finessing the comms and making it really amazing, and there's others who find it hard work, and I was one of the people who found it hard work.
So you realised at that point that perhaps this wasn't where you wanted to be long term?
Yeah, and so I think the thing that kind of gave me like the thrill was solving the consumer problem. So like what drives revenue, what drives consumer behaviour, how can we influence that? And so that led to me, going into the marketing strategy side of things and then going into kind of true strategy. And there I worked for a few different ex-consulting people who were managing the strategy teams. And that was really amazing as well. So, getting coached on kind of, consulting style decision-making and methodology and ways to present ideas and dissect ideas. And that was really key, I think, in taking me then. I feel like I had a career where every half step was almost, when they are summed up, took me in a totally different direction. Every job I had directly related to the job before, but had this whole new element.
But it's really interesting that you talk about that because I think there's so many of our clients, they're in jobs such as marketing or it might be HR, whatever it might be, and not enjoying what they're doing and feel like they have to do like a drastic kind of 180 on their career to get that kind of new experience or new context in terms of what kind of tasks and activities they're doing. So it's really interesting that you say, even though each job was related to the one before, it was a totally different approach or totally new area in a lot of ways too. Did you find that was enough to kind of keep you interested and keep you engaged in what you were doing?
So I never hated corporate, as in, because everything, but what I did do is I had not a short attention span, but if I look back on my career and my CV now, it's kind of like 1 year in this role, a year and a half in the next role, which would be in the same organization. And it wouldn't be necessarily because I chose to leave my old role, but maybe in that role I came up with a new initiative, and then I was asked to lead that initiative, and that initiative lasted for a year. And then because of that, someone else wanted me to roll it out in their department, or, so what it did do is probably showed me that really where my interest was either fixing things that were broken, starting new things and rolling out new things, figuring out how to fix a major problem in a business. So that kind of my area of expertise ended up becoming how to make more money, make more money for a business, whether that was because I stopped money being spent on something or came up with an improvement that made us sell more or made the product more profitable. Yeah, and there was a couple of probably times where I did things that were a bit risky through my career as well. So I'd been at a bank and I had been having a pretty good run in terms of like interesting jobs and getting promoted. And my partner at the time, my now husband, he got a job offer interstate in Sydney. So at that time, I kind of had this, should we move to Sydney? And it was felt like I would be giving up a lot to move to Sydney. And as part of that, kind of had this, okay, no, it's his turn. And if I go, I'm going to go with the intention of coming back to where I work now because I loved it. So I'll go and I won't work for a competitor. I'll go and get a skill that's outside the skills that are in my organisation. So when I come back and can bring something back to the organisation. So it was kind of a bit weird, but it had a huge impact on my whole career in the sense that I ended up going into and working for News. So News, as in at that time, was a major media player in Australia. I don't know that they are so much now, but it was went into digital media, which was totally different from banking. And I went in, my job was to start a white label car insurance brand for them, which was kind of still financy enough for me to get the job, but was totally different. The job lasted 3 months before they decided not to do that initiative. And I got absorbed into another totally different role that I would never have ever thought I could do. And that exposed me to startups, the digital economy, tech. And when I came back, I had a totally different skill set that was now really valuable to my old organisation. But I didn't go back for a while because there was too much new interesting stuff to learn in that space.
It sounds as though you were really quite considered in your career decisions. You really thought about it at a pretty deep level in terms of the kind of skills and exposure and experience you wanted to get. Did you get any advice, or was it just you had that, I guess, intrinsic drive and motivation to keep progressing in a new and different way? And
so my theory of probably from when once I probably had a bit of confidence in myself, which wasn't necessarily that early, but, once I'd built some confidence in my ability, my theory has always been that once you have a good network and a good reputation, it's pretty easy to get jobs. Maybe not in these corona times. But that kind of idea that, okay, so worst case scenario, I can get a job that's probably not the best job ever and not the best paid job ever, but I probably will find something. And so if that's the case, if that's my default position, I may as well experiment knowing that I will be able to get a job in the end. And I guess probably what that meant is that, so I didn't really I have had career coaches and business coaches at various times, but not related to that. I think it was probably more that like seeking learning has been like a big deal, and also forcing myself. So for example, when I finally got pregnant, instead of taking a maternity leave, I resigned. And when I did that because I thought, I know I can get a job back here. This is when I was back in a bank. I know I can get a job back here because of my reputation and my network. But I also know that when I'm probably coming back from having a baby, it'll be really easy to come back here and do a job that's like a bit mediocre and part-time, and I'm on special projects and whatever. So I don't want to come back here because it's the path of least resistance. I want to come back here because I want to, if I do come back, it's because I want to come back. And so by resigning, I knew I would have to make it harder to come back. And then I would actually be forced to assess all of my options. And I would only go back if that was truly the best option.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really different way of looking at it. Wow. Because a lot of people wouldn't take that risk, but I think it's such a clever way to do it.
At the time so I'd been trying to get pregnant for a while before that, and I'd ended up back in a bank. And I just saw, I think probably of the team that I was in, there was a really large percentage that were part-time mothers, and they would go from having these great roles to coming back maybe a year later-ish and being put on a 2-day-a-week low priority project where they became, and this is obviously a while ago, they became a bit of an add-on to the core runnings of the business. And so having witnessed that process and kind of witnessed them start to become willing to take anything that fit into the days that they wanted, I could see that it would, like, the work that they were doing wasn't interesting and exciting and all of those things. And they weren't learning a lot. They were doing kind of the grudge work that actually no one else wanted to do. And that just seemed horrible.
Oh, look, it's so true because, this happens all the time, and you want to leave your babies for something worthwhile. You want to be able to be fully utilised and optimise all your skills and strengths. And, I think there is something to be said for having a role that might be, not too challenging or difficult, perhaps if your baby's really young and you're sleep deprived and all of that, but pretty quickly want to be back where you were and you want to be contributing at the same level that you were. And that just doesn't happen. It really is still a real problem for mums returning.
And I feel like as well that from what I witnessed at that time, which is, probably 10 years ago now, really, ish, they were then kind of stuck in this pool of part-timers where they changed jobs within that pool, but they never, well, not never, it was rare for them to then re-emerge back in. And I think that probably banks pay well, so you've got the hot golden handcuffs that then if they moved out of that, they would be facing a pay cut, and really easy, I think, to have other factors start to influence your decisions, that when you're in a situation like dealing with childcare costs and just all of that, like, working part-time and having kids is so difficult that the idea of changing jobs is more scary, I think.
Oh, 100%. And then what happened next? So you resigned and had your baby.
Well, so I was doing IVF for a long time, and when I'd left Sydney, I'd actually come down. They bought a startup, and I'd also made this decision that I would apply to come in as the chief operating officer, the COO of that business, and it was really risky. As in, the business was not that stable and not necessarily didn't have a path to like a great future. It was risky. But at that time I'd already started having miscarriages. So I'd had my first miscarriage in Sydney, and I decided probably that being back in Melbourne and being home was important. And so when this role came up, I thought, well, hopefully I'm going to have kids soon anyway. Hopefully I will actually have kids, get to have kids. And so if I'm back home, that's a good thing. And then if I've got this risky job that may not work out, I will have spent that time that I'm trying to get pregnant learning something really interesting during that time. And so, and I also like the idea, I kind of was likening at the time to getting an MBA, as in this idea of like, I can go to uni and get an MBA which is hard and stressful and an extra thing to add on to your normal life anyway. Or I can go and work somewhere at the coalface that's a startup and see what it's like and kind of almost get like a live MBA, or get a real life experience being in a situation where I'm watching problems of a startup and the challenges happen, and that is something I don't currently have, and that will add to my experience as an overall kind of future executive. And so I came back to Melbourne in this role as a COO, and it was so hard. It was, and I learnt so much, and it was realising what happens when you don't have an HR department, or there's a board that doesn't get along and has big personalities, and the impact of that on the business. And through the time that I worked there, I was still having miscarriages, and then the business didn't go very well. And so I put my hand up after about a year to leave as part of a major cost-cutting exercise. And so then went back to a bank. And then when I was on maternity leave, so it has a happy ending. I've got two kids. But when I'm at home with small children, I decided that I was kind of going a bit batty, like just in terms of not so much being bored, but found being a mother with young children difficult in terms of, like it was pressure, and my kids were close together in age, and I found I needed some kind of relief, I guess. And so I decided that I'd teach myself textile design. So as part of that process, I found this, and I'm sure that there's heaps of these for all different fields. There's a thing called Spoonflower, and it's like this online community of textile designers, and they have weekly competitions. And so, the competitions are ridiculous in the sense that it's like kittens in mittens one week, and then it's zombie apocalypse the next week. And the idea is you design a fabric and submit it, and then everyone in the community votes on the winners, and I think there's 10 winners, and you can enter under not your own name, and there's the cost, if you know what, like the reputational cost or the cost of being wrong or the worst design. There's none, you can just submit it anonymously. Anyway, so I decided, as part of my like keeping sane with small kids, I'd enter the weekly competitions for textile design. And as part of that, it ended up being this like really amazing creative outlet, because I'd be walking with my double pram down around the streets of Melbourne and thinking, oh, I have no idea for zombie apocalypse fabric. And then as I'm walking, I'm thinking of ideas and doing them and submitting them. And then over the course of the time that I was participating, I decided I'd give myself the challenge to see if I could be in the top 10 ever. And I'd do it until I got into the top 10. And so through the process, it was really interesting because, my designs were so bad at the start. I just can't even believe how rubbish they were. But to execute my ideas, I'd have to do like an online tutorial on how to make gradients work or how to do eyelashes or whatever it might be. And so I learnt a lot about the skills that I needed to do textile design without really thinking of it as that being the end goal, more thinking about it as a way to have a creative release when I was at home with kids and things felt a bit oppressive.
You had that period of maternity leave, and you entered that competition and started kind of really getting a bit more technical, I suppose, with the textile design and Googling. You did have some interest in creative and textiles and fashion and things prior to that, didn't you? You were doing quite a bit of sewing, and what kind of piqued your interest, or how long has it been since you have had that in your life, that kind of fashion, textile, sewing?
So I reckon I've been sewing since I was probably 12, and I think probably I've always been a maker, if that makes sense. Like I've always been someone who's been really interested in making things. And so I've gone through various different stages of like experimenting with making jewelry, or I don't know, polymer clay or whatever it might be. And my craft cupboard is like my secret shame that if anyone looks in there, they can see all the different stages of weird fads I've gone through. But I think for me what happened was, not only did I have that kind of sewing fashion kind of interest for myself, I had real problems around getting dressed for work. So that sounds a bit weird, but you know, I'm taller than average and got big boobs, and my weight kind of goes up and down a little bit, probably within like a 5 kilo, maybe 10 kilo range. And so in my time in my careers, I kind of ended up pitching myself as this kind of internal innovator. And so in theory was, you know, my personal brand was really important. As in, I'd come into a room often with a group of incumbent, kind of maybe older, traditional decision makers, and I'd meant to be coming in with fresh ideas and selling them the future kind of thing. And as part of that, it was really important for me not to walk in a boring black suit. I had to come in and kind of communicate that I was a different thinker in those first nanoseconds of them assessing me when I walked in. At that stage of my career as well, I was probably often the youngest person in the room, or maybe the only female, or whatever it might be. Thankfully, that kind of stuff's changed now. And there I was at the shops trying to find clothes that actually fit me, or were comfortable as well, from this idea of like, maybe I had a breakfast meeting, a day at work, and then maybe a networking event. So clothes had to be really comfortable and not polyester sweaty, and, you know, not too wrinkly, and all of these things. So I guess while I've had this interest in sewing, I've also had this enduring problem. Like, so I can't really remember a time when I would have a big meeting, would chuck something on, think I look amazing, and walk out the door and have like a, you know, I could remember, like, that might happen so rarely. And the power of a good outfit day is something I really believe in.
Yeah, it's enormous. It is enormous. And like you talk about your personal brand, and it is that whole, how you present in totality, and that does involve your outfit, and your outfit involves how you feel on the day, how you feel about what you've got to contribute. You know, it is a really important part, isn't it, of just being, you know, sitting in a room, and often you'd have to present, I'd imagine, too, in your role, so you know that all eyes are on you, and you do want to be able to show a bit of personality through your outfit. You don't want to have to just wear what's available.
And have you feel like you're dressed up, you're playing dress ups in someone else's clothes because they're just not right and they're not you. And so after I'd had kids, I ended up getting approached by some people I'd worked with previously to start a startup accelerator that existed in Sydney and start the office in Melbourne. And after I'd been doing that for a while, I had this meeting. There was a new director of the board, and I had a meeting with him, a breakfast meeting with him. And I had 2 kids at childcare, and for anyone who's tried to get kids to childcare and have a breakfast meeting on the same day, they would know that it's already, like, you're already battling uphill. So I had kids who wouldn't put their shoes on. I had this really important meeting. I'd done all my pre-work, like my PowerPoint presentation was amazing. I knew all my stats and figures and was so prepared from a work sense. Trying to get out the door, trying to wrangle the kids who were young at the time. This was my first job back after kids. Get them, you know, ready. And then it came time for me to get ready for this big meeting and get dressed. And I was having a fat day. Everything was in the wash. You know, I couldn't find clothes that made me feel really good. And it was my first meeting with this director of the board. I really wanted to be startup-y. Like, I had to kind of, you know, do this. And so I ended up having like this disastrous morning where I ended up getting the kids to childcare, getting clothes on my body, getting to the meeting in time with like 1 nanosecond to spare. He would not have known that I was late and frazzled. Well, I wasn't quite late, but, you know, it was a stress to get there.
Yeah.
And I walked into the meeting with him and just had this moment, which was, if I stuff this meeting up or give him a bad impression of me, it's not because I don't know my stuff. It's not because I'm not good at my job. It's not because I'm not prepared, like I've done the work. It's because I couldn't get myself dressed this morning. How is it that I've been getting myself dressed for my whole life, basically? And that's the thing that's let me down. Like, how?
That's taken you right to the ledge. Oh, yeah. Yes. I can totally relate, Soph.
So that's, I guess, where this idea of Tahlo came from, and that this kind of this enduring problem that I'd always had. But even at that point where I had all of these things going on and was in theory doing kind of okay from a career perspective, I was being let down by something as basic as getting dressed, like my morning routine and getting dressed in the morning. And it started this kind of journey of thinking, okay, is this just me that this happens to? Surely there's other people who this must be happening to, and started this process of conducting a whole lot of interviews and researching with people before forming the idea of what Tahlo is now.
So you realised it was obviously a really common issue amongst women?
Yeah. So what I did is, because I'm a huge nerd, I obviously went through this like strategic framework process and conducted a lot of interviews with people and found that it was a common problem. Like, so for most people, finding clothes that met their full criteria, including being not needing dry cleaning and being easy to care for, all of those kind of things, was really difficult. Was somewhat difficult, but the solution for everyone was different. So it wasn't like there was this amazing work dress that if we just produced that, suddenly it would solve everyone's problems. Mm. Every woman had a different view of what their good day outfit was.
A transitional time as well in terms of women in the workplace. Like if you think back, when did you start Tahlo? Was that 5 years ago?
So it's 3 years.
Okay. But, it hasn't been that long that we've been able to be more creative with what we wear in the workplace. If you think back to when we kind of started our careers, so if it was kind of the black suit and the grey suit, and that was all that was kind of accepted, and you did have to worry, like, either your skirt was too long or it was too short, it was just so hard. And it didn't feel like you're right. It just felt like some corporate uniform that you were required to wear because that was sort of what was expected. And I think that's now transformed. And obviously we do have a lot more creativity now with what we wear at work, thankfully. So it was probably the timing as well.
Yeah. And I feel like as well that there's something around stages of life and what you wear. So I feel like even now when you're early in your career, from, talking to different women about how they make choices about what they wear, often wearing suits or kind of being more tailored or more corporate is linked to wanting to prove yourself. But when you actually get to the point where you're pretty comfortable in your abilities and, like your personal brand and those things, that's when you want something that's work appropriate, but actually you. And that's where you kind of, these different wardrobes kind of merge. And I guess something like meeting with a board or a new director or someone who could be a key decision maker in your kind of future career or prospects, they're kind of those moments where you don't want to go in your imposter clothes. You want to go looking great and feeling great and, all of those things. But anyway.
Yeah, I think how you look and how you feel, they're just so intertwined, aren't they, really? It is, and that doesn't mean that, whether you're put on 5 kilos or not is irrelevant really, but if you can still feel good in an outfit and, I think not being constrained by the expectations of, whether it be a corporate environment or not, but I'm thankful that has sort of become, a little bit more flexible in terms of how we can present ourselves.
Yeah. And the other thing that was interesting that I learned, and I know this probably isn't totally on topic, but when I interviewed women, one of the things that was kind of universal was that people were time poor, and where shopping had kind of been fun maybe when they were 20 or before kids or whatever, now it was actually finding things to wear was a time suck. So basically of all the things that they had to do, they had a new job and they had so many other things to do, and if they had 3 hours spare, the idea of walking around Chadstone was possibly secondary to maybe spending time with their kids or catching up with their friends that they hadn't seen for ages. Or so I think that time really, when I think about Tahlo, it's about giving women clothes in a way that they can reorder the same clothes and it saves them time. And unlike normal online shopping, they have certainty around fit and things. And they're all things that kind of came out of marrying the fashion side, but also understanding the problem that people were experiencing, and that it wasn't that everyone wanted the same dress that I wanted. It was actually that people wanted the ability to save time and find things that fit them and reflected their personality, but their personalities were all different. So.
Yeah. So that kind of all links back, doesn't it, to the fact that you were saying before about, your enjoyment of solving, complicated problems or just solving problems in general and coming up with ideas and solutions, plus, your obvious kind of natural passion or interest in fashion. So it seems like a really lovely marriage of your skills and strengths, this Tahlo business that was born. So going back to that morning when you were sitting with that exec and you'd had a hell of a morning and it was a shit show and you walked in probably a little bit flustered, how did it turn out? When you obviously had an epiphany, and we've all got to kind of hit rock bottom to have that kind of that epiphany and that growth that comes afterwards. But what happened then?
So the job that I was doing at that time, I was running a division of a business that was coaching people in starting their own businesses. Tech startups basically, and also working with corporates around innovation programs and stuff like that. And so if I'd had that same epiphany and I wasn't in that environment, the recipe of me starting Tahlo wouldn't have worked. So what I'd learnt as being in that environment was I was surrounded by people who were potentially failing, and that was okay. I guess what I ended up coming around to was the way that I was thinking about doing my own business was less around this idea of like, I believe in this. This is my reputation. I'm putting it on the line. If it fails, it's my failure. And thinking about it as almost like a medical experiment. You do experiments in science in high school, and it's like you write your hypothesis, and then you can create an experiment that's going to prove or disprove that hypothesis. And then at the end of that, you're not wed to, if your hypothesis is wrong, say, well, I thought that this was going to happen. I did the experiment, it didn't. And so
it was about the experiment. You make it about the experiment rather than being about Tahlo and Tahlo being successful. It's about let's put this out there, and it's about testing, I suppose.
Yeah. And that kind of is that me starting to think about it in that way is almost what gave me permission to do it, because it started to be less about like, if I fail, it doesn't mean that I'm stupid or wrong or anything. It means that the market told me that my business experiment, that my hypothesis was not right, but that doesn't reflect necessarily on me as a success or a failure.
Mm-hmm. Clever reframing.
Yeah. So, and I think that if I hadn't, basically what it did is it de-risked failure. So it meant that me starting a business, it meant that I spent time in thinking about what the experiment was rather than thinking about, and I also, I guess probably, and this was part of working in this startup environment with, lean startup was the thing of the day, where you don't invest everything that you have because you know that it may fail. So you know that your hypothesis might be wrong. And so, I'd learnt a lot about how to, use free tools and make things, see if customers were interested by getting them to sign up for lists and stuff that's much more commonly known now. But that meant, okay, if I put these hurdles in place, if we can't get people to sign up without spending a huge amount on marketing, we know that our cost per acquisition or cost per customer is going to be too high for us to sustain that over 5 years. So that was a tipping point that we need. Like, I would have cut off the business if we couldn't acquire customers at a efficient marketing kind of cost. So there's all of these things built in if you think about the experiment, even though it's really easy to get caught up in the romance of success, I think.
And especially when it is something that it's so personally meaningful to you. It was something that you really felt within your heart that was really important to get out there. And in Tahlo, for you, it's almost like a baby. It must have been really difficult to kind of remove that personal kind of investment in it to be a successful business. So I think it's amazing that you were able to do that. In terms of that research, was that all while you were still working, or had you by now stopped working
So,
on Tahlo?
oh, sorry, I'm talking over you. So the way that it kind of happened a bit back and forth. So at the same time that I'd had this epiphany and I decided that I needed to figure out if this was a universal problem or how many people had it and what the true problem was. And so I started really thinking about that. At the same time, I'd been in my role for long enough for me to learn a huge amount, but then that learning curve was starting to plateau. And I was also in a situation with that role, I'd taken a pay cut to take that role because I thought it was really interesting. The hours were huge. And so, I mean, it's the only time in my career where I've worked consistently past midnight, not at home. And I remember someone saying to me, wow, your husband doesn't mind that you're coming home at 3 o'clock in the morning. If I did that, my husband might think I was having an affair. And I remember thinking, it's not really normal what I'm doing. I'm like parenting 2 small children, coming home from work at like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning from the city, getting paid really badly. And
in hindsight, good training for a startup, probably.
Totally. The equation of that job, I guess, was that the money was worse than, I was coming back after kids. I deliberately chosen a job that the pay wasn't as good. The hours in theory were meant to be flexible, but probably flexibly high rather than flexibly good. And I was going to learn a huge amount. So once I'd kind of been working there for, a year, and I'd learned, my learning curve was so steep and I felt, my brain exploding at times because I was learning so much. Once that started to plateau and it started to be more about managing personalities within the business to get things done, and I kind of had a good handle on a lot of the strategy and the kind of elements that I needed to learn, the equation stopped working. So now I was suddenly in an environment where I was getting paid worse, I was working huge hours, and I actually now was just dealing with the internal mechanisms of an organisation that you could argue was not actually functioning that well anyway. So it became kind of a timing game where it started to be that, okay, so I think it's time for me to move on. I could stay and prove that I can do this for a longer time, or I can be a bit selfish and kind of get out of this environment and either learn more somewhere else or do something else. And because, I'd been around failure, I'd been around people who were giving things a go and were so passionate, as part of uncovering the problem, I'd become really passionate about this idea around, the feminism kind of element of it. So if women are less confident, speak up less in meetings, put their hand up less, stand up and go to the whiteboard less often, what role does clothes have in that, as weird as it sounds? So if you're wearing pants that are too tight, are you going to stand up and do the whiteboard, or are you going to think, oh, I'll let someone else do it because I feel a bit gross today? So it ended up becoming kind of this thing in my head that if a group of women who care about this can feel, 1% better every day of the year, what's the kind of multiplier effect of that? And so the passion drove me on. It was about clothes and fashion, but it was also about this kind of sense that there was a purpose to it that was more than just the fashion or just me doing something different.
No, I love that. I mean, I just love that, what was behind it. I just think that's brilliant. And it might seem like a superficial thing, what you're wearing, but like you say, it is really important. And really successful, intelligent people like yourself had those feelings of, I don't know if I want to stand up, and I'm sure I've been there as well. I just don't think men would feel that way. I just don't think they would think, oh, I'm not wearing my best shirt today. I'm not sure if I want to get up in front of the room and speak. Like, I'm sure there are a few exceptions, but as a rule, that confidence for women is just so much greater. And there's still a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah, and I think a lot of those decisions are made kind of in the nanosecond. It's not so conscious. And I think as well from that research, I realised that there's a lot of conversations that women have in front of the mirror or in the process of getting dressed, in like, oh, we're meeting with the ad agency today, I think I might want to wear something a bit cooler than normal, or, I want to look this. People like not even really aware that they're thinking of these things, because it's almost like, you know, people talk about sex being taboo, but actually the conversations that women have with themselves in front of the mirror are actually truly part of the area that's still taboo, and often not even conscious conversations we're
it's just so ingrained. So how much of that do you reckon is still kind of linked to that, the fact that there's that objectification, I suppose, that, you know, that's still something I think that's within both men and women, that historically that was kind of our purpose.
I think
only in the last little while that's kind of started to change.
Yeah, I think that really, if you think about women in the workforce as an evolution, it's still kind of new. It's still like the revolution really has only kind of just finished. And you and I would both have stories in our past that not that long ago. Well, okay.
A whole other podcast, so.
It's not that long that we've been really dressing in a way that we're confident. So I think, yeah, that idea of like wearing what men wore, but you know, the suit and mimicking them is one thing. But I actually think that for both men and women, there's kind of like this middle ground, which is personality plus professionalism. I think everyone's going to move into that centre, including men, I reckon.
No, I think you're right. I don't know if you've read a book by Jamila Rizvi called Not Just Lucky. I think, no. Yeah, you should have a read. You'd really like it. But I have read that recently, and one of the things that was just really confronting to me was that there's more male CEOs named John than there are female CEOs in the top Australian corporation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I've heard that stat.
I heard that stat was just like, wow, okay. We still have so far to go, don't we?
Yeah, and I think that there's like the big fight on the obvious things, and I feel like the fight that I feel called to is this little fight that is these micro moments that actually undermine some women's confidence on a regular basis. I did some quant research, some quantitative, so I did a survey as well as part of my whole exhaustive process, because, you know, that's how you do things. And I did it to the universe, like it wasn't to people I know. It was, you know, an open kind of survey. And there were people who had, a good chunk of people had arrived late to a meeting because of getting dressed issues. And some people had even cancelled meetings because, not saying this, but because they just were having, the process to get ready was just such a hassle that they'd got so frazzled and got themselves in such a bad headspace that they'd cancelled meetings and stuff. So when you actually dig down to the behaviours that not feeling confident drive, there's
it's
like,
it's really
and it does link directly back to women putting their hands up and feeling confident and to neutralise clothing as a negative would have a huge impact.
I think it's brilliant. So then once your research was complete and you realised, yes, this business needs to be born. I mean, obviously Tahlo now is a successful brand, but there's probably been a lot of blood, sweat, tears, hours that have gone on behind the scenes to get there. But just for our listeners' sake, like in terms of making that decision to open the doors or the online doors, and, you know, what were the hardest parts about that initially?
So I think there's two stages. There's the part to get it live, and then there's kind of now, 3 years in. So the part to get it live, you know, again, I mentioned I really benefited from being in that startup environment. I remember thinking, you know, mocking up the amazing design tool that we'd have when we launched, and kind of talking to a few friends, kind of work friends that I had that were tech experts, and showing them what I was thinking. And they were like, that will cost you a fortune. If you do that, if you spend your money on that and it is wrong, you'll be done. You need to just see what you can hack, basically. And so I ended up starting with a hacked Shopify site. So by hacked, I mean, you know, like tweaked and getting something to do something, what I needed ineloquently in order to test if that was the right thing. And that was absolutely key. So if I'd done the solution that I originally wanted, I reckon it probably would have ended up costing me like a couple of $100,000. I reckon that would have been quoted to start with as like 60 grand, and then it would have, it would have ended up being a beast, and it would have been wrong. So what I know now about how our customers make decisions and the information that they want, I didn't understand the process well enough at the time that I designed that, even though I thought I did. So one of the things that I think is probably common-ish, and I know friends as well who've done this, is that they've decided that they're going to build an app or a tech platform or whatever it is, spec'd it up, found a developer, started spending money, and then it's never got to the point that it's quite right, or they've spent too much money. And so I'd really encourage people to talk to people who they know about their idea, who, maybe is a past colleague or whatever, and start to think about, how can I do this spending the least amount of money possible to prove if it works or not? And then once I've got the answer, then I'll spend the money. Because technology, in the time that I've been doing Tahlo, so 3 years, I mean, it's moved on so much, and in another 3 years it will move on again, that you don't need to build things in the same way that you needed to build things before. There's so many different components you can put together to make a solution that might have a few sticky notes and rubber bands and things to make it work, but that will allow you to fine-tune the kind of end result. I think as well, people shouldn't be afraid about talking about their idea to other people. So I know this is kind of commonly held in startup land, is this idea that is someone really going to steal your idea, like really? And if they did try and do it, they're not going to execute it with the passion that you have if it's truly your idea. So actually talking to people about it is much more likely to have them say, oh, actually, I know someone who did something similar to that and it failed. Do you want me to put you in touch with them so you can have a chat about what happened? Yeah, I mean, I feel like, there's so many people who've said, oh, I want to talk to you about my startup. Are you okay to sign an NDA, like a non-disclosure agreement? And it's kind of like, really?
How many startups are completely original? I mean, you're going to probably have a little bit of competition anyway, and that's okay. I mean, with Tahlo, I know it is a pretty unique offering. In fact, I don't know if you mentioned, for the listeners' sake, like what is Tahlo?
Yeah, the idea behind Tahlo is that we have a series of styles and people can customize them. So add pockets, make it a size 10 waist and a size 8 hip, or choose the fabrics. So they basically can customize their own clothes that are then made to order. And there's no one locally that does that. But the idea is that not only do women end up getting clothes that fit them properly in colours that work for them and make them feel confident, but it saves time, as in they might have a couple of great tops that are their favourite work tops, and then they can just get them with short sleeves for summer and long sleeves for winter, and any fit kind of issues that they might find from online shopping and the hassle of returns and the hassle of going to Chadstone, let's say, kind of are eliminated. So we would have like a lot of CEOs who we do their wardrobes, and they just send us an email and say, I want the same blazer as the red one I got, but I want it in grey.
Of your customer base is repeat business, that I keep coming back for the similar pieces in different fabrics. And
and that was part of the I mentioned the experiment earlier. Part of the kind of hurdle was that we had to have a certain amount of customers that bought again within a certain time to know that the product worked well enough that we weren't going to have to rely on marketing to constantly get new customers. We could actually have customers with a high lifetime value where the business wouldn't be so inefficient to run from a cost perspective, because we could rely on our product to create advocacy. And
yeah, so from what you're saying, Soph, I mean, so much of your marketing experience and expertise has been useful in, getting Tahlo off the ground. Would you say that's been kind of a critical thing?
I think that probably my expertise is a benefit and a curse. So when I started this, I thought, I've got the business side of it. I've managed P&Ls, I've done complex strategy stuff. And I thought that even though I'd sewn, I thought my blind spot was really fashion. So I have never worked in a fashion business. And I originally hired to cover that gap and thought that was going to be my big risk and my huge blind spot. And what I learnt as part of that is that because I was trying to do something different, a lot of the people who'd worked in fashion were so ingrained in kind of the old way of doing things that really the experience wasn't totally relevant. And it probably took me 2 years to realize that it wasn't a skills gap. Actually, if I just followed my gut and had more confidence around that to start with, that was the least of my problems, was having this gap around garment. I think probably that I do have which I didn't know, but it turns out I do have a bit of this maker's brain. You know, my dad's an engineer, and I think probably in my brain I find it really easy to figure out how garments would be put together and can kind of do pattern making in my brain. And so that's been a really important skill that I didn't know that I had, but I guess probably is actually what drove the hobby or the interest for me mucking around in making to start with. And so I think probably that would apply to other people as well, is that if they love interior styling, that it's probably actually because there's something in their brain that they see that they may feel that they're underskilled in, but actually it's a core competency that.
Yeah, a lot of our work kind of centers around that, you know, trying to get people to kind of recognize or unleash some of those natural skills and talents, because often that is what you should be doing for work. I mean, there are passions as well, which are a side thing, but in terms of those things that just come easily to you, that you feel really kind of excited or energized by, and that you might choose to do outside of work time, like it's something that you would kind of lose time doing because you're that into it, they're often the thing. It's sort of very indicative of what you're good at and what you should probably be focusing on in terms of making money or making a career out of it.
So there's been some things that I've learnt are gaps that I didn't know were gaps though as well. So one of the things that has been like one of my biggest problems has been that starting my own label, I probably underestimated how uncomfortable I would feel putting myself out there. So if you look at kind of, you know, my past development assessments and stuff, I'm borderline introvert, extrovert. So I'm literally half. And in my roles, that's never really been a big deal. Like I was happy to stand up and talk in front of a big room of people about the initiative that I was passionate about or whatever. But actually being a huge self-promoter has been a problem for me. And I found that my business would have been much better if I was someone who was happy to be out the front of the business. So for me, it's really uncomfortable posting pictures of me in the clothes on Instagram. Like I might be able to do it, but a little bit, but I really struggle with being out there. So I feel like there's probably something for introverts when they're thinking about, if they're thinking about doing their own business, to really think about how much they need to be out the front and how uncomfortable that's going to be, or if they can design a model or a growth path that means that they can be behind the scenes. Another thing that I found really difficult is that my natural work style is collaborative. And so I really love being in a team. I love being the dumbest person in the room because everyone's so smart, and that's really exciting for me. And so doing things alone as a sole founder is actually against my natural work style. And there's been times when that's been really challenging, that I've really missed having a team for us to have a problem and go in front of a whiteboard and rip it to shreds and come up with some great idea that isn't mine and is better than anything that I could come up with myself, because, you know, more heads are better than one. So that's something that as well, I think that being a sole founder is quite testing in that way.
Okay. So have you used any kind of business coach or mentor or anyone like that who you can kind of thrash around ideas with and get their points of view and use their expertise? I mean, you said you did in the research phase. You pulled different people in from your network, which is really great when you are a sole operator, to be able to pull people in with different levels of expertise and knowledge that you might not have.
Yeah, kind of. So I have people that I catch up with from time to time, but it's really interesting being in like a sole founder, especially if you've got kids, like home obligations that are non-negotiable in terms of they need to be fed and watered and whatever, is that time becomes so critical that I found myself being really critically in assessing how I spend my time. And so in terms of thrashing out ideas, I find that I have to educate people, spend so much time educating people on the model and why it's different and things like that, that it ends up being a huge time suck to bring people in. And so instead I end up choosing this person who's an expert on this, and that's like a finite kind of problem that I need advice on. I also tried to have a co-founder. So that would have been much better. And I really encourage people, if they have a good co-founder, that would be great. Unfortunately for me, the co-founder who, we'd spent a lot of time figuring out how it was going to work together and how we were going to structure things and who would do what, ended up being diagnosed with breast cancer, and so stepped out of the business. And which, obviously she had some hard times, but great news is that she's fine now. But it meant that probably being a sole founder wasn't ever really the plan, and things can really change really quickly. And you have to be, even if you go into it with someone, you have to be aware that it still might be just you at the end. And on that topic of a co-founder, I guess I'd also say that it is like marrying someone, in the sense that any co-founder is probably worse than no co-founder. A great co-founder that maybe you've worked with before in a past job, and your working styles and you work really well together, would be ideal.
Yep, that's good advice. So where to now? Where's Tahlo at now, and what are the growth plans, or what does the future hold for Tahlo, do you think?
So Tahlo, so I guess we're in these COVID times, which is probably a great time for thinking about things. I guess, as part of COVID, so we have a fitting room where customers can come and try things on and make adjustments and get fitted, basically. So our outlets closed and we're online only. Our supply chain's also been disrupted in terms of our tailoring studio being closed temporarily and things. But I feel super optimistic about the future. But it's interesting because I have thought about, okay, do I just close this down? When does the experiment end? What is success? And I guess as part of that, I do probably every year, I think, should I go back to corporate? So it's not
for your personality though, Soph, I think, in terms of just assessing the different options all the time, and probably.
Yeah, I kind of go through this same cycle, which is that I think because I guess one of the things is that I don't earn the money that I earned in corporate. So I work my guts out, and financially there has been an opportunity cost to me doing this, that if I'd stayed on my career trajectory in corporate, I would be earning much more than I am now. And I guess, I start to think about how it would be so great to be in a team innovating. But I go through this process of talking to a few people and then talking about that I maybe romanticize being out of corporate. The grass is always greener, romanticizing what it is. I guess as well, there's this other thing that's kind of a tension in startup land, or when you start your own business, is that when you're in a corporate, sometimes red tape can be a frustration, or politics, or whatever, having to sell things into so many layers of people to get things done. And that can be a frustration. The thing that I would say to be aware of is that when you do start your own business, the frustration becomes a lack of resources. So where you might have a great initiative, and if you can sell it into the board or the management team or whoever it is, and they fund it, you're away. So convincing them that the business case is there is often the hurdle. And then once you've done that, you get to tick the box and kind of go for gold. In your own business, your pockets aren't that deep. You can't convince anyone that they should drop a couple of mil into your initiative and it can be done. And so I would say that wanting to run faster and do more and be better, but not having the money to invest to do it in the quantities you need can be a little bit frustrating at times. And so it's not that you go from a life of being shackled by corporate to being free in your own business. It's kind of you're trading one set of shackles maybe for another set of shackles, but then obviously there's the benefits of getting to choose your own hours, you deciding everything. And also even little things like in this COVID times, there's been days when I've not done any work or decided to have a few days off, and there's zero guilt for that. I'm the boss. If we decide to shut the doors, it's because I've decided it and I don't need to explain that to anyone. There's a real freedom around the buck stopping with you, as much as there is a burden as well, that would make it hard to go back to probably the feeling guilty about not working hard enough or meeting expectations or the next performance review or...
Yeah. And how important, Soph, is that kind of the cause of the organisation or the business for you? Because, you know, if you did go back to corporate, now that you've kind of had a taste of something that you're kind of deeply passionate about and you really believe in, to then perhaps potentially going back to, say, a bank or some kind of large corporate organisation, do you think you would still be able to have that same level of commitment and interest in what you're doing?
I think that would be a really interesting experiment, because I think probably each time I go through this romanticizing corporate, I end up coming out with this idea that it is me having a moment of the grass is greener. And really, when I evaluate it, it doesn't really stack up. Being values led is really important for Tahlo. So, you know, a sustainable supply chain, choosing fabrics that are really well sourced and don't harm environments and stuff, that's really important to me, and I don't have to make any compromises on that. Whereas if I was in a corporate, I mean, some of the stuff that I've worked on has ended up in the Royal Commission, like a banking Royal Commission. Let's not kid ourselves. I was working on some stuff that was not, it was highly revenue focused, and there is often a trade-off in big business when you're talking about that. And so being totally values led is also really freeing. So being able to disagree with this particular aspect of this particular supplier, so deciding not to use them, that's totally within my remit, and I don't need to explain that to anyone. So that's really great. And also there is this, sometimes we have people in tears because they have massive boobs and they've not been able to find clothes that fit properly or make them, we genuinely are having an impact on people's lives. And even though it is in this frivolous kind of fashion kind of space, actually it does go to this kind of bigger cause about making women feel great in their own skin based on their own standards of what a good outfit day is.
And if you think about like the greater impact of that, it's enormous. Like if that means that somebody does feel more confident going to work or going into a meeting or going for that promotion, I mean, it really could play a massive part in women's representation, whether it be on boards or executive teams or, dethroning some of those Johns out there. I think, that's an amazing thing to get out of bed for.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just finally, what kind of advice would you give for aspiring either fashion designers or people who just have a real interest in that area or perhaps want to start their own fashion line? Are there a few things that you'd recommend in terms of the due diligence that they should do, or just the skills that they'd need at a baseline to get into something like that?
So I think that you need to be really, if you want to go into fashion, you need to be really clear about the financials. So there's a lot of fashion businesses that start and don't make any money and then close. Like there's kind of probably a 3-year cycle, or maybe even only one season, that people might do one line and realise that there's not actually enough margin in their business or volume to actually survive. I know people who've spent a huge amount on packaging and branding and done one line and then not actually totally sold it or not made enough money to cover their costs, and had to retreat back into wherever. I also think about the passion mixed with the fashion, I guess, because there's a lot of ideas, I guess, that can be of the moment for yourself. So if I think about having kids, there's a lot of kids lines maybe that might start, and just be aware that when your kids are 16, are you still going to be wanting to design onesies or whatever, or is it of this moment? And actually, could you just go on to, Society 6 or something and create some really cute onesies for your kid? And
keep your day job and just do that perhaps on the side as a bit of a side hustle. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think that there's a lot of people running their own businesses who are actually working for free. And I think that there's also so many businesses out there that have really passionate founders but aren't doing something different, or there's not a reason for people to seek them out. So I think that there's a process of being super clear about how your business is different.
Yeah, it's about solving that problem, isn't it? It's identifying what is the problem and then solving that problem that so many people are experiencing. I think that is so important to think about before you launch any kind of business.
And I think as well, you can go and talk to people. Like I reckon probably once every 3 months, someone would come into the fitting room and say, "Hi, I've looked at your brand. Can you tell me how you got started?" Just random people off the street. And I'm totally an open book. They probably don't realize they're going to get every answer under the sun when they ask that question. But
you just direct them to the podcast. You can say, "Here you go, listen to this."
But I think that you can ask people how they did it or what, if it, because having those chats with people, I know I'm always totally honest in what I tell people, what my opinion is, which they can take it or leave it. But I also think this idea of taking half steps into jobs. So, when I worked as a COO in that startup, that was so invaluable, and putting myself in situations which exposed me to different elements of different parts of the business. So, it would be great to go and work in a fashion business as the HR person or the marketing person, and I think once you've done that, you'll see a lot of the warts of the industry. There's some pretty bad stuff that happens in fashion. It's definitely coming from corporate. I've definitely had moments of being really shocked as what's acceptable in fashion that would no way be in any way acceptable in other industries.
Interesting. So you didn't do any formal study, did you, in terms of fashion? And you feel like people need to do that to break into the industry?
Right? So I think my assessment of the fashion industry, and, I hope I don't get struck by lightning after I say this, but it's really undertrained. People working within fashion, again, I've kind of been surprised coming from corporate and having had probably over my career a lot of money invested in training for me. There's a sense that must happen everywhere, but actually the fashion industry, typically it's a bit of a school of hard knocks, and it's relatively hostile in the sense that the history of it is that any young up and coming designer could be the next big thing. And so there's a wariness amongst people who work in fashion about sharing their secrets or their secret sauce. And so what happens is that, I've had women like friends who are now friends who were kind of started off as semi-mentors who work in fashion, saying that their bosses said to them, "I had to learn it the hard way. Don't ask me, you'll have to learn it the hard way about how to put things together well and stuff." So it's not like there's not a we all rise with the tide. It's more like every fashion brands consider each other competitors, and individuals within fashion brands consider other designers competitors. That's what I've kind of gleaned. And so I guess what that means is that it's not that there is a group of really highly trained experts in fashion. There's a lot of people who are making mistakes or not doing best practice. So I think that you're probably better off to research best practice. Like listening to podcasts is a great thing. I think there's a lot of really interesting articles. I think it's different if you want to do things like pattern making. I think that it would be important to have a maker's brain or have someone who is like a co-founder or an employee who has an understanding of construction. I don't think that needs to be necessarily formally trained, because I think there's a big cost to training formally. Like if you decide to go and do a 3-year degree, let's say in fashion, that's a big investment of your time. And it's also a big vote that what they're teaching you is actually what you need to know. And because the industry is changing so quickly, I don't know that that's the case.
Yeah, and interesting what you mentioned earlier about you thought that was going to be a gap for you in terms of that garment fashion design piece and how to put garments together. But in reality, it probably hasn't been what you've needed in terms of closing gaps in your business. So it's interesting to think about what kind of skills somebody breaking out into fashion might need. And it sounds like you need a pretty thick skin as well.
Yeah, but it's interesting because you still hear stories of someone starting something and it taking off, and then 2 years later they're a massive brand. And so I guess there's something around kind of this self-belief thing and giving it a go, but just making sure that you don't sink your own ship at the same time.
Myself, just anecdotally and, on Instagram or speaking to people, a lot of people who seem to create a label or have their own label tend to have some kind of profile already, whether that be a D-list celebrity who decides to launch a range or what have you. So they're kind of capitalizing on their already established name or profile, and then this is just kind of another feather in their cap.
Yeah, and they'll end up being your competition. And it's so if it's about being an influencer and you're not an influencer, then competing with influencers is not necessarily a good idea. And Basic is a really interesting brand, as in the founders of that, who did work in fashion beforehand, say that they aim to create a quiet brand. And I think that's a really interesting idea around, believing in your product and being kind of relentlessly have relentless standards in how you're going to do things, and have a quiet brand that grows through word of mouth, and because the product is so good that people love it and want to keep wearing it. I think that there's different paths to doing it, and I also think it depends what your objective is, because if your objective is to be the face of a brand because you want that for yourself, that's really different from wanting to have a business that can pay your kids' school fees or pay your mortgage or whatever. And success, really being super clear on what success is for you personally.
Yeah, which is going to be different, isn't it, for everybody? And it's just thinking about your why. What is your why? And just staying true to that the whole way through if you can.
And there's things that are like just a pure delight in my job, in the sense that, so at the moment I'm designing fabrics we've got this new environmentally sustainable fabric coming in, which is really exciting. We've done heaps of testing on it to make sure that it's really easy for women to wear. And I'm designing the prints for that. And it's like this great, falling down this amazing creative rabbit hole where I get to design fabrics and get really excited about who's going to wear them and where they're going to wear them to. And parts of it, that creative element of designing fabrics was never, ever going to be in my career in corporate. Like, it was just no way that I would be the person who would get to do that in any shape or form. And that's something that I would never have thought I would have been a legitimate person who could do that. But it's interesting. People walk into the fitting room and look at the fabrics and say how beautiful they are, and they don't know me, and they don't know, and that I'm corporate and that I shouldn't be doing it. So it's been interesting that probably the people who've been most resistant to me doing it are people who have known me for my whole life, where they think, hang on, you're not a creative person. Why are you doing this? Or what do you know about fashion? So I think that kind of plays to this idea around imposter syndrome, where it's easy to feel like an imposter, but almost one of the benefits of putting your brand out there is if customers love it, that's where you can get your confidence. And they're not telling you they love it because they know you.
Yeah,
it's because they want to spend money on it and buy it.
Yeah, and the results speak for themselves. But, you're 3 years in, so it's still pretty new in terms of being, I know for fashion that's a lifetime. But, the fact that you're still standing 3 years in and still going well, that's an amazing testament to your obvious skill and creativity. So
yeah, although I've made some major stuff ups as well. That's a whole nother podcast.
yeah, we call them learnings.
Yes, opportunities for improvement.
So looking back, any regrets? You probably changed things, but no regrets in terms of taking that leap into your own startup world?
No regrets. I think probably being prepared that there's like a learning curve and that you'll get it wrong at the start a bit. It's just a matter of how wrong you get it, and being okay that whatever your idea is, it's a little bit wrong. You just don't know how much wrong it is. And I think one of the other things that's probably I'm glad that we did is that we've assessed. So we opened a fitting room. We intended to be online only, but being reactive to what customers tell you and where the market is, and making sure that what you planned at the start is still relevant, I think is, putting in like 6 monthly checkpoints to make sure that what you're doing still makes sense is worthy. But yeah, it's all good. I wouldn't change it, and it'll be interesting to see what happens next.
How often do you see Tahlo when you're kind of out and about? Do you see Tahlo on the streets? That must be.
Oh, we were on the front cover of Women's Day this month.
Look at you.
So we the ABC wardrobe department uses us a bit. Well, so we're on TV sometimes. So it's really cute when we get text messages or messages from customers saying, "Oh, is this Tahlo?" And they get really excited that I don't know, Lisa Miller from ABC Breakfast is wearing a Tahlo or,
Very
stuff.
cool.
So,
Very cool. Well done, Soph. Congratulations. It's amazing. So just finally, can you just let our listeners know also where they can find you and find Tahlo?
okay, so we're at tahlo.com.au, which is spelled Tahlo. Or if you are an Instagram person, we're at Tahlo Style. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for the chat today. It's been amazing. And I hope Tahlo still keeps going as well as it has been. I have no doubt that it will. And enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thanks, Em. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Relaunch Your Career. If you did, please subscribe, share with your friends, leave a review, or connect with us on social media at Relaunch Me Career Consulting. If you have any questions about the episode or the work that we do, then contact us via the website relaunchme.com.au. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.